Hello and welcome to North 100, a Canadian Highlander podcast. I'm Serge. Joining me, I've got a Wheeler.
Ahoy.
And a Jer.
That's the wrong order.
See, I was trying to set it up. The comments were asking for a time where Wheeler played it super straight and Jer got to do a joke. And I was like, this is your time to shine, friends. And there you go, chat. We read the comments. That's what you get. You're not chat. You're the YouTube comments or the podcast comments. Reminder that North 100 is brought to you by you with your support of the Patreon over at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Welcome everybody to part one of the Zendikar Rising set review. A reminder that this is a Canadian Highlander review. It is not exhaustive. We're not going to talk about every single card in the set, only the ones that we think are interesting to the format. Today, we're going to be talking about white, blue, artifact, and land, and every card is going to be evaluated from a Canadian Highlander point of view. Let's just jump right into it. Archon of Ammeria. 3 mana, 2/3 Archon for 2 and a white, has flying. Each player can't cast more than one spell each turn, and non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. Wheeler, start us off.
Cards messed up.
They really weren't messing around with the hate bears in this set.
Yeah, they've put out some really strong hate bears in the past couple of years. There's so much going on for this card, even though it's very simple.
It's both Thalias with flying.
Yeah, it's Thalia and Eidolon of Rhetoric.
Yeah, I mean, not exactly both Thalias, but pretty close.
And on a Kinjali Sunwing bot. Yeah. So which is really interesting because for those not familiar with Eidolon of Rhetoric, it's 2 and a white for a 1/4 enchantment creature that says each player can't cast more than one spell each turn. And I feel like when a lot of people are building hate bears decks or mono white like D&T, I see that card pop up all the time and it's just not worth it.
It's a 1/4.
It's a 1/4 for 3, so it's not attacking. It's an enchantment, so it's really vulnerable to getting hit by a Reclamation Sage or a Knight of Autumn, which isn't great. But the effect is a powerful-ish one to have, certainly. Like mono white. And, you will find times where you double spell, but it's not super prevalent in the matchups where this text is relevant, is going to be infinitely more relevant.
Especially when you have so many mana sinks in the deck and activated ability lands where ways you can use your mana with equipment and whatnot, bouncing it around.
Yeah, if you spend your turn casting an equipment spell, you might want to use the rest of your mana and turn then equipping it instead of, playing another spell, because then you just you play this equipment, it's not exactly doing anything. Or you play a spell and then hold up spot removal, right? Your spot removal can be pretty cheap and flexible.
Do you think this is a main board hate bear? Is it good enough? Is it relevant enough? Or is
this card's insane?
Yes. So that's what I'm getting to, is that this card has all these, the Thalia text is just, Thalia is Thalia. And Kinjali Sunwing is also pretty darn good, but they're all it just has all these features attached to it. It's a relevant body, not dying to shocks, that has evasion, easy to cast. You can't see my hands, but I'm doing the ancient 2 mana thing.
Wears equipment super well.
And then it just it takes these abilities, the first one especially, that you've always wanted to play and you really shouldn't be playing, and now you get to do it. So that's kind of messed up.
I want to slam this in green white too. A deck where the toolbox deck, it's just so powerful in that deck.
Yeah, I was thinking about this with green white a lot actually, because I was just well, I guess, when I was trying to think of situations where you would double spell with mono white or even Boros, I was just well, it could come up a lot. I mean, it's not as relevant. But then I was well, for green white, you're more likely to have a bunch of 4s. So you play this on 3 and then play Questing Beast, and you're not ugh.
Don't forget the 5s, Ben. The 5s.
So it's just oh yeah, you can play this in the hate bear decks that also just don't care. This card is just and it's also could occasionally be a mid-range card if you really want it to be. This card is just really terrifying.
Amazing. All right, let's move on to our next card, Archpriest of Iona. 1 mana, *2 human cleric. Its power is equal to the number of creatures in your party. Now, since this is the first time we're approaching party, what is a party, you ask? A party consists of up to 1 cleric, rogue, warrior, or wizard. So the Archpriest is going to enter by itself as a 1/2 and has the potential of being up to a 4/2. But at the beginning of combat, On your turn, if you have a full party, target creature gets +1/+1 and gains flying until end of turn. So I think the first thing we need to discuss is, does party have a home in our format? Let's throw to Jer really quickly just to answer that question.
I'm slowly shaking my head. You've seen me do it before. I'd like you to picture it now. I don't think many decks can plan to have even close to a full party. Some decks may be able to plan to have 2 of 4 somewhat regularly, but even getting 3 of 4 I think is probably not worthwhile or particularly achievable in any sort of consistent manner.
I think, you shouldn't judge these cards. And I thankfully think that a lot of people aren't immediately judging these cards, assuming they will have a full party.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, which is, all right, let's just assume, how is this card by itself? Like, what is the minimum case that you'd want to be playing this?
By itself, party as a mechanic is really just card by card, right? In the sense that it's a cheap white creature and it's a cleric. White has a shockingly high amount of, admittedly, a lot of clerics, but you'd be surprised how many wizards there are, and warriors as well, right? Like rogues, that's the tough one, but realistically, this can be a 1-mana 2/2 without really having to concede card quality. Like, don't include this card in your deck and go like, okay, well, I have to make sure I have at least one rogue and X amount of wizards and Y amount of warriors.
But like, what turn are you happy still casting Isamaru on, right? Like, Isamaru is amazing because you get a 2/2 on turn 1 or turn 2, but like, the fact that you need a board and your worst case scenario is this is just a 1-mana 1/2.
Well, I mean, if I cast this on like turn 8 or turn 7 and it's only a 1-mana 1/2, I'm a little, I'm not super enthused, but admittedly, I'm also not super enthused of Isamaru. And by then, usually you will have either equipment or other creatures to help supplement, well, the dog. And if you have other creatures, you probably will have one of them, filling another slot in the party. If you don't, that's just the cost of playing a deck with 1-drop creatures in it, right? I like this card. I think party does get better though when you add more colors. So in like 2-color aggro decks, right? Like if you're like Boros and you play this card, like Boros every single Jackal Pup sort of deck, there's just a bunch of rando rogues, warriors, and wizards across red white. So it'll get a little bit better in that.
I just don't think you want to risk playing a 1-power 1-drop in that deck though. Like once you add a second color, the average card quality just goes up, and I don't think this card has a high enough upside to justify playing it at its like average to lowest case.
Yeah, again, like, are you playing Isamaru in that deck?
Yeah, you definitely are.
I mean, Dark Confidant is a wizard.
Well, it's like, the way I look at this for something like Boros is that if I'm a just like low curve Boros aggro, like no equipment, no double strike shenanigans, or minimal of those, the reason I'm playing this is because I get to play the, redundant aggressive 2-power 1-drops, as well as burn and some, hate pieces along the way. And at 2, a lot of the aggressive creatures that I'm going to want to slot in are warriors. Like a lot of them. And the ones that aren't are probably, maybe they're soldiers, but there's also just a handful of wizards, because they slap wizard onto a bunch of cards that are just really angry fire throwing creatures. So I don't actually see a huge risk with this card in particular. There are other cards that reference party where I'm really low on them, because you're only going to have 1 to 2. But given where you would want to play this card and the frequency in which this will just fill, like you'll just get to 2 in your party, absolutely, like super consistently.
Let's move on then, because we'll get to those other party cards. Let's move on to Amerias Call. This is our first modal double-faced card. 7-mana sorcery for 4 white. Create 2 4/4 white angel warrior creature tokens with flying. Non-angel creatures you control gain indestructible until your next turn. And on the other side, we have Ammeria, the Shattered Skyclave, is a land. Enters the battlefield, you may pay 3 life. If you don't, it enters tapped, and it taps for a white. Jer, you like wraths and control cards and maybe angels. What do you think of this card?
I mean, this card isn't a wrath, but
Sorry, Entreat the Angel.
yeah, this card definitely isn't as good as Entreat the Angels. These cards are kind of hard to evaluate, I think. Just because like they're never that bad, but the front side usually isn't like amazing, but what's the opportunity cost of putting this in your deck? I don't think this one in particular is going to see too much play. Like I don't think it's worthwhile playing it in control. I think it's just just too expensive, and the cost of having a tap land or a land that bolts you is pretty high in that deck, especially as a white land. If only there was some large mono white deck that existed that could play the card. It doesn't exist, but like if there was, that deck might play it.
All right. Next up, we have the Fearless Fledgling. 2 mana, 1/1 flightless bird griffin. Wait, what? Has landfall, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on the fledgling, and it gains flying until end of turn. Wheeler.
Well, this card, it wins the award for the most significant or evident like a disparity between the arts, because all the landfall cards have fancy art to them as well, and the normal art of this card looks like a baby bird that is shrieking at you, which is terrifying.
It's like falling to its death, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a little unfortunate. But then the landfall special art, it looks like a phoenix. Like it looks like it's this very regal, magnificent bird.
It's all grown up.
Yeah, but it's still a fledgling. But speaking of growing up, this card goes up in the sense of it gains flying, gets taller because you add counters on it. I actually don't mind this card for mostly the skies kind of variants of decks. I will get to other landfall creatures eventually, like the really aggressive ones. I think there's been a lot of whispers and like genuine like attempts at landfall aggro-ish decks too, where like they just occasionally will cast Scape Shift and then dome people out for a bajillion and have other, Ren and 6 shenanigans. And I think that card, I mean, if that deck ends up really taking form, then this card will be in it. But also just like, if I'm just a white aggressive deck with evasion, so like just I'm playing Honor of the Pure and attacking, and I want my things to not be blocked, then I think this card has a home. You do need to play a land to give it flying, which is a thing, but I don't know, the counters are pretty all right.
Yeah, one fetch land and all of a sudden you're pretty happy.
Yeah, all this really needs to, if this clocks in like once in the air, or like at an opportune time clocks in, like maybe you stagger your fetch lands just to like trade off 1 point of damage on this turn, but if they develop a blocker, then you're guaranteed more damage with flying. So yeah, I like this card, but only in very like niche applications.
All right, let's move on to Felidar Retreat. 4 mana enchantment for 3 and a white. Has landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, choose one. Create a 2/2 white cat beast creature token, or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain vigilance until end of turn. This is just so comically better than the other white retreat. This is ridiculous. Wheeler.
Retreat to Ammeria. Yeah, like let's double the power and toughness of these tokens, and then also just give you things counters instead of a temporary boost and vigilance. So that's a lot of text and a lot of thing. It is a 4 mana do nothing that admittedly require, in the sense that you need lands to make it, well, do something. But it's also a card that just, assuming that you draw no other spells for the rest of the game, can also just take over a game. Like if I draw this and then for the rest of the game, I just draw lands, and some of those are like fetch lands, maybe one utility land, like you might just still win because you're either building an army, or you build an army and when something gets in the way, you make them a bit bigger. And you get to attack and with vigilance, and so that racing can kind of get awkward. Like 2/2s are a lot, right? They add up quickly.
And they get big quick.
Yeah. So this card this is a weird one because I know decks that I want to include this in, but they're not exactly decks that you talk about to convince somebody of its power level.
Like, no, it's good. I swear.
I want to play this in white green mid range with like the lands package.
Yeah, like I was thinking of like a lands, like a Naya or Bant or white green base deck that like has land shenanigans that are degenerate, but also just like I just want to cast my 5s and 6s, right? Like I'm going to play this Primeval Titan fairly.
Oh, baby.
Yeah, like a Primeval Titan, get Kessig Wolfrun, the blast from the past.
Or with this, get Gavity Township and, maybe...
Green, white, lands, tokens. Let's go.
Like this card just kills people dead, but you might not... Like the decks that it could pop in might not necessarily be on your radar.
All right, let's move on to Core Blademaster. This is a 2 mana 1/1 core warrior with double strike for 1 and a white. And it also has another line of text saying, equipped warriors you control have double strike. I'll take this one. I love equipment. I love Boros. I love Boros equipment. And look, like, I'm already playing Fencing Ace, and this is a very interesting upgrade. I don't know how many relevant warriors there are in that deck though that don't already have double strike, but I'm sure a quick look into this is kind of neat. Oh, do you have an example?
Call me a clickbait article, bud, because the answer might shock you. It's a lot. Again, like, they've been slowly trickling in warriors, like things that were that would have been soldiers like 5 years ago. They're now warriors. Like, think of every red card that you added after like Kaladesh and Amonkhet block. It's a warrior. Yeah.
All right. Well, I hope you're not a coward next paper fight, because this core Blademaster might be coming at you, Wheeler.
I'm never a coward.
Well, perfect. I guess you can block then.
Well, blocking is for coward, but yeah.
All right, next up, we have the Luminarch Aspirant. 2-mana 1/1 human cleric for 1 and a white. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Wheeler.
So I had a funny moment when this card got previewed with fellow lover of just boring white creatures, Nick Prince. When this card gets previewed, Simic players or like Sultai players are just kind of like, oh, okay, like, this the bad card. And then people that love mono white creatures are just like bouncing off the walls. They're like, oh, beautiful, this is what we need, baby. And like, for Canlander, it's not as that, but this card, when dropped early enough, gets out of hand real quick. Like, it does something immediately. Admittedly, like, you might just play it and the first combat it's just a bear, right? But a counter every single turn adds up.
It attacks as a 3/3. Like, worst case, it's a 2-mana 3/3.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you could play it by itself and it fills a role that like you want your creatures to do, let alone the utility that this can provide, like resetting your kitchen finks.
Like, remember when people used to play the Slith creatures? Like, imagine getting the counter before combat and just getting it no matter what. Like,
I am guilty of playing Slith creatures and like crossing your finger and be like, this card can get out of control. It gets +1/+1 every combat I hit somebody. All right.
Yeah.
I mean, explaining it that way, suddenly I'm a little bit warmer on this card, because I was pretty lukewarm on it, honestly. I was like, 2-mana 1/1
and like,
snore.
that's the worst case. Like, you can also put it on better creatures. Like,
All right.
you can put it on your double striking creatures.
My introductory of like, oh my god, I'm super excited for this. It's just like Suntail Hawk into this. Like, it's just like, I can make my flyers bigger.
Honorary flyer, is that what you're saying there?
Well,
Anything else you want to say on it?
it's also a cleric, so you're adding another cleric to, potential party cards.
All right, let's move on to Maul of the Skyclaves. 3-mana equipment for 2 and a white. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control. Very interesting thing about all the equipment in Zendikar Rising is it has that text, unless you know off of one off the top of your head that doesn't have that. I think that's every equipment in the set. All right, I'll just say I'm right. And equipped creature gets +2/+2, has flying and first strike, and also equips for 2 white. This card is very interesting to me. I don't know if it's good. It's like, imagine if grafted war gear only like equipped once, right? Because that's how I feel casting this. I mean, the white in the casting cost is also a little bit awkward. That's a pretty significant downside, honestly. Doesn't cast off workshop.
I think this card is good. Yeah, I think the amount of times you're going to cast it and your opponent's literally just dead, like they're abyssed on turn 3. It's like, and like, it's better than the abyss because you're actually going to get to hit them sometimes because it gives flying. Yeah, I think many people are just going to die to this. They're going to look at their hand of lightning bolts. You're going to have like a 4 or 5 toughness creature, and you're either going to like take up their entire next turn and 2 of their cards, or they're going to die, and not slowly.
I thought you'd be a lot higher on this, Surge, mostly because like the immediate like Griffin guide kind of aspect of it, in that it gives you evasion and this bonus, and then you also get something later on if you really need it, but usually they're just dead.
It's so expensive though.
But like,
I can see the obvious upside, but I see the white mana pip as being very limiting to the decks that it can fit into.
The double white in the equip is the one that is like, well, I can see where you're coming from, but I don't think the 4 mana part of it for the
No.
is, yeah, you're just talking about not being able to play this directly off of Mishra's Workshop.
Correct.
I think
That's
your
why I'm
brain
sad.
might be tainted by Mishra's Workshop.
How dare you? You take that back.
Yeah, you're not Ben. You don't have it literally every game.
Yeah, like this does enough off Ancient Tomb, and like in a deck where you want to play accelerants to get really cheap cards out ahead of the curve or super quick, empty your hand, then cast Wheel of Fortune or cash in a Bowmat Courier, you will find yourself with extra lands, and you're just like, I have 5 mana and I'm playing a 2-drop or I'm playing a 1-drop.
I'm probably gonna cast it. I'm probably gonna warm up on it, but I'm not wowed when I look at this. Maybe I'm just like, it's not splashy, and like it goes, but it's not wowing anybody.
Yeah.
All right, but no, fair enough. I will cast it. I will equip it. I will likely kill people with it, and I'll pout while I'm at it.
Oh my god, yeah.
All right, let's move on to Ondu Inversion. 8 mana, 6 white says destroy all permanents. But tight on mana? Well, fret not.
Hang on. You missed a keyword.
Oh, destroy all non-land permanents. Sorry. Destroy all non-land permanents. And if you're short on mana, the other side, because this is another modal double face card, is a white source that enters the battlefield tapped. Jer.
This is a card I can get behind. I've been looking for an excuse to play Planar Cleansing for longer than I'd care to admit. And worst case, a tap land isn't great, but it's also not the worst. And just having access to something like this in your deck, in a control deck, is pretty great. So I'm actually pretty high on this card. I think it's going to be a useful tool. I don't know if it'll sort of stand the test of time, but I'm excited to try it.
I have an interesting question for you here, Jer. Specifically as a control player, how do you feel the double modal face cards will impact the amount of lands that you put into a control deck?
I will count a bunch of them as lands.
Like straight up as a land or half a land? Like, does this replace a land in your deck? I'm really curious about that, especially in this evaluation.
But it depends. I think this card you could replace a land in your deck.
Do you replace a land or do you replace a spell and then do your math somewhere else?
Cut a plains for this card.
You would cut a plains for this card. Wow.
Ben's not a fan.
Wheeler, yeah, I'm very curious about this, honestly.
My narrative with these cards is being like, I know you're not going to get a really concrete answer until people have played enough with them, because it does something that we don't ever get. Right? Like it's this is not, I mean, we've had, lands that also let you could do something else with them, right? Like, I guess, but like cycling lands, right? Like that's kind of
yeah, I think these are different. Like when how I evaluate these cards is I look at it, and if I'm happy to play the spell part, like maybe more than a third of the time, I will attempt to put it into my deck. And then I look at it and I'm like, all right, will this be a land more than 50% of the time? If so, I'll count it as a land. If not, then I will count it as a spell. Be wrong, but that's how I'm doing it until I get more experience.
Well, no, yeah, that's what I'm saying, is that I think that they're so different that people don't have a strong, like, yeah, this is what they are 100% of the time. Yeah, my operating is that it's not going to change how many lands I play, but it might change the type of cards I might be inclined to include in my deck or how I mulligan.
I would, in deck construction, just if I had to look, because you make your whole deck and then you go through and you look at your ratios, you look at your spells, you look at your curve, you look at what your deck is trying to do, and you think about it. I would probably count each one of these as half a land. So if I wanted 35 lands in a mid-range deck or something like that, I would play 34 normal lands and then 2 of these spells and be like, yeah, I'm at that mark,
I think you're better off being more granular in your approach and looking at each card and assigning it like a percentage of a land, if that's how you want to do it. Because like there are some of these spells you'll play as the front half way more often than others. And so like counting each of them as half is probably...
I mean, but that depends on the game. I think you're sometimes disciplined when you see a spell and you're like, okay, I need to make my land drop. It doesn't matter how good the other side is. I'm going to die. And in that case, it doesn't matter what the other side says. It's just the land.
Sure, but you're less likely to be in that position if you'd been like, oh, this is a spell most of the time, so I'm just putting another land in my deck. Then you get the ability to play it as the front half more often.
That's very fair. I'm sure we'll have a lot of these conversations as we go through the set. This is a fascinating mechanic. All right, next up we have Resolute Strike. 1 mana instant for a single white source. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If it's a warrior, you may attach an equipment you control to it. Now, this is a card that excites me. Maul the Skyclaves, maybe you'll be able to kill somebody with it, but look at this. Imagine the blowout potential with this.
God, if somebody within like an hour of this episode dropping doesn't have that like meme of guy looking at girl walking away, where it's like Serge is the dude, the girl he's currently with is like modern, like well costed equipment, and then the other girl is just like +2/+2. It's just like, oh yeah.
How dare you?
No, I mean, I'm with you on this card.
Yeah, this is tough. I don't know how many warriors there are. Highlander already is a format where not a lot of people play a lot of combat tricks unless you're into a like infect or muscle wizard style sort of deck. So I don't know how often this is even making the cut. I think this is the sort of card that doesn't make it into your initial 100, but you look through and you're like, wait, I have warriors and equipment. Resolute Strike, get in. And they're like, oh, I've been sitting on this bench for so long. Is it finally my time to shine? And then you're like, oh, actually, wait, no, sorry, you're 101. And then they just cry.
Here's a fun little ditty to play with you. Over the course of Magic, I guess the answer is kind of obvious just by why I'm even asking this. Do you think there are more warriors or more soldiers?
Oh, I have no idea.
If you asked me this, I would, and just like completely out of the blue, I would have guessed soldier, because soldier's just been around forever, right? So there is almost like just over 75 extra warriors, right? And now that's not going to be, well, how many good warriors and good soldiers are there, right? But like...
It's like Gatherer Search, 75 hits, warrior.
Yeah, let's just say a lot of warriors were designed in eras with a lot of cards getting banned. So you have some pretty reasonable warriors that exist. I think that there's soldiers in total, there's like 697, and then warriors are 774. And like they started phasing out soldiers and making a lot more warriors. And there's just good warriors. And like I think there is some benefit to just 1 mana +2/+2, right? Like if pump spells aren't in decks, then the effectiveness and the surprise factor of this pump spell just goes through the roof because nobody's expecting it.
I mean, I think we've talked about that a lot on the show of how not enough people play combat tricks in this format because you're like, oh, I could play another amazing mid-range threat. And you're like, all right, I guess.
Yeah, and like this will pop up when we talk about the double-faced cards that are also lands, is that a lot of them, you know, in the same category of this kind of spell, is a lot of them will provide effects that you might not necessarily want to dedicate a card slot to, but you want that kind of effect available, right? You don't mind having it.
Well, you get to play silver bullet effects.
Yeah.
And so this card is just like, well, if I told you, hey, do you want to play 1 mana +2/+2? You're like, well, no. But what if you got to play it in a deck where you also had an added evasive element of, oops, there's now a lightning greaves on this creature or a sword on this creature. And they're like, oh, that's pretty good. But you'll also just find yourself giving a creature +2/+2 and it being good, right? It'll save your creatures. It'll push through extra damage. Somebody will dedicate their turn trying to like cast a pyroclasm, and then you just get to laugh while you play something that looks like a draft common.
I mean, it is, but that's fair. All right, let's move on. Next up, we have another double modal face card here. We have Sagiri Shelter, 2 mana instant for 1 and a white. Target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. And on the other side, a white source that enters play tapped. Wheeler.
I guess this is kind of good timing coming off the conversation we just had. I like this card because I think targeted protection spells like this are pretty good. The problem is that you only get so many slots to have cards like this, and they can be kind of awkward in matches where you're like, all right, I'm holding up this Brave the Elements. Sorry, is that a Supreme Verdict? Oh, I'm dead. Or like...
Or you're like, I got this Brave the Elements, and then they're like, Thrun. And you're like, oh.
Yeah,
That's not a removal spell.
I think this card just provides enough utility, like targeted protection, and it is cheap. 2 is more than I'd like. I'd ideally like to pay 1, but just drawing this late, it won't be dead, can push through extra damage, can save your one creature, help you stabilize. And if you know you're in a match, right? If you're playing a mono white deck or white X deck and you know you're in a match where, hey, maybe targeted protection is going to be wonderful to have, maybe you don't play this as a lane, you keep it kicking. Maybe you, or maybe you're playing that kind of deck and you draw a bunch of equipment and you're like, well, I need to cast this equipment on curve, so I'll play this out. So overall, I will admit that I value these cards pretty highly. Like, I really like them. They're the exact, God, these cards butter my biscuit.
All right, anything else?
No, yeah, good card. Yeah, I really like this card.
All right, sorry to cut you off. And I was like, I don't know how many more times how many other ways you can say how much you like it.
Well, I like it and it's good.
We're gonna find out with this next card.
All right, next up we have Skyclave Apparition. 3 mana, 2/2 core spirit for 1 white. When it enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target non-land, non-token permanent you don't control with CMC 4 or less. And then when it leaves the battlefield, the exiled card's owner creates an XX blue illusion creature token where X is the CMC of the exiled card. Wheeler.
Okay, I mean, I'm not, there's not much to say, because when you get to a card this, like, wowie zowie, like, I don't really have to gush. This card's very powerful.
Why does it say non-land permanent? Why does it say 4 or less? Like, it can exile things that are more expensive than it.
Yeah. There's also that space between the two abilities, which is pretty cool. So it's good with Ephemerate. It's good with any kind of flickering like that. Like, the worst part of this card...
It has the old templating, right?
Yeah. The worst part of this card is that it's white, and a 3-drop. And I guess, like, it being a 2/2 is like, I get, you could say, like, oh, it's a 2/2, wish it was a 2/3, but, like, yeah, this card's a slam dunk.
So really quickly, for people who might not understand the applications, why are you excited about this card? What role does it play?
Sure. So
it kills Oko.
I mean, that's admittedly the biggest one. I'm excited about this card because it's a white creature that disrupts my opponent's board, synergizes with cards that I'm already playing in my deck, and even in a worst case scenario, I just don't care. Like, I just do not care what happens. Like, this could hit play, kill whatever they have, and then they kill this immediately. Okay, great. Like, that's fine. I signed up for this, right?
Is this just like a modern Flicker Wisp sort of way to push through lethal damage?
Well, that's the beauty of it, is you don't need this to push. You just cast this when you don't like your opponent having a thing.
When it hits non-land permanents, so it's so very rarely dead. Like, even in the combo matchup, you tag their Grim Monolith or their Jet Medallion or whatever.
You cast this again. If you're on the play in a deck with a bunch of Moxen or Mana Acceleration, and you go like land Dork go, and they're like land Birds of Paradise, and then next turn you just go, okay, land Mox, kill your birds. You never get that back. Like, that's brutal. That's not a thing that white gets to do while also keeping their creature. Right,
and applying like reasonable pressure. Like,
yeah, and that's not a 10 out of 10 scenario. This card is there's just so much going on for it.
It's not a you getting their Oko scenario.
All right, well, thank you for taking that time to explain. Next up, we have the Skyclave Cleric. 2 mana, 1/3 core cleric for 1 and a white. When it enters the battlefield, gain 2 life, but wait, there's more. It could also enter the battlefield as a tapped white source. Jer.
I wish this said gain 3, but it's probably a meta call if you're playing a white deck and need to beat red decks, or maybe the odd black aggressive deck. Then I think this card is fine. It's not splashy. Does a job. Never going to be bad.
All right. Let's move on then to the Squad Commander. 4 mana, 3/3 core warrior, 3 and a white. When it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white core warrior creature token for each creature in your party. We're back to another party card here. And then at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain indestructible until end of turn. We have our second party card here. Last time we started with Jer. Wheeler. What do you think about the party aspect of this card?
So white 4-drops that involve tokens typically get broken up into 2 different types of cards, right? You either have the planeswalkers and like immediate cards where they hit the table, they make tokens. That's kind of what they do. Or they hit the table, and you cross your fingers that they don't kill it, because if you untap with it, say a Leonin War Leader or a Hero Blade Hold, you win the game, right? Like the cards that just like create their own army. Brimaz is another kind of example of that. And so this falls more into the category of, hitting the table, making a team. But am I playing this over Planeswalkers? Am I playing this over, I don't know, there's other, Planeswalkers are usually the best one, right? You only get so many 4-drops. So like I could see this theoretically in the decks you'd want to play this in, making 2 tokens. But there are just, in my opinion, there are just better things to do at that mana point when it comes to making tokens.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that one. All right, then let's move on to our final white card of the day, Tajri, Beacon of Unity. 5 mana, 4/6 legendary human warrior for 4 and a white. This creature costs 1 generic less to cast for each creature in your party. Now, mind you, if you have an empty board, you don't get the auto deduction. The last card we looked at, Squad Commander, counts itself because it's an ETB trigger. This is a cast trigger, so this doesn't come with the automatic deduction. Then it has an activated ability, 2 or blue, 2 or black, 2 or red, 2 or green, so 8 mana or 4 mana, depending on how many colors you play. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal up to 2 cleric, rogue, warrior, wizards, and or allies from amongst them and put them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in any order. I mean, let's open this up to the team. There's a lot of words on this card. Do any of them excite you?
Human. I think human is the most relevant line of text on that card.
I like 6 toughness.
Yeah, that too, I guess. Yeah.
That's all I got.
It doesn't have any keywords though.
It's also not an ally, which is just kind of infuriating. Like, I don't think it matters that much, but just like, why?
I would have enjoyed them having, like, it doesn't have to be relevant to anything too much, but just throw ally on a lot of these cards, because now there's just so many people just at home staring at their undue clerics being like, they said they'd make more. I think human tribal is the only place that's coming to mind for this card, like 4-color, 5-color humans,
because you might just incidentally hit a bunch of the other subtypes.
Well, yeah, because like the human, like race, as opposed to the class, right? Tribal cards, creatures, tribes are broken down into race class. So the human warrior, usually, or well, not, I guess not usually, but a lot of the times we've talked about warriors being important, but for this one it's human. And so you will play human rogues, human clerics, human warriors, especially in a deck that can branch out to 4 to 5 colors, and will just play the best card that's a human in those colors, right?
Yeah, but why would you add a bad card to a deck full of good cards? That's my evaluation of Tajri here.
Because that's literally what tribal is, though.
Yeah, but this doesn't have any synergy. Its activated ability is so expensive and it doesn't have any keywords. So like, let's say the ideal case where you have a bunch of humans on your board, you could slam a lord, you could slam a creature that makes your board better, or you could slam this 1 mana 4/6 that does nothing.
Well, I think saying it does nothing is a little disingenuous. It's I could realistically, in a deck like that, foresee it costing 3 or 4 with some regularity, and then being able to just have a large-ish body. Yeah, admittedly no keywords, but also you're a tribal deck, so you're going to impact the board with other activated abilities or effects on you getting to cherry pick, what humans you want to add, as well as you could also just play some spells.
Are we supposed to look at this like Tasigur? Is that where you're looking at this? It's a bigger creature that can get reliably cheaper and then maybe refill your hand if the game goes long?
It's like medium in the humans deck. I think that's what Ben's saying.
Yeah, I'm saying that if you want like a card in the mid game or like at your top end in a humans deck that will allow you to have a relevant body in play, that like, or at least a body that is difficult to get off the board, that can also just restock your hand because you're a tribal deck and you're just going to get goozled by people killing your stuff over and over and over again. So yeah, and maybe, I don't know, it's not my category, but like I could, if somebody told me like, yeah, I've been playing Tajri in my 5-color like zoo deck or my 5-color hate bears deck or whatever, and it's been really strong, I could see it. Like that could make sense to me.
I guess. I just don't see a world where you're playing it over Kenrith, right?
Well, Kenrith is a 5-drop, right?
Oh, sure. I mean, I often try and think of it in the worst case scenario, or even the medium case scenario, right? So I guess this isn't Goyf. I guess you're happy to get like a 3-mana 4/6.
I think you have to give some kind of leniency to tribal cards because, like, in their worst case scenario, tribal cards are just absolutely unplayable, right? They're just like all bad.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's absolutely fair. I hear your point. I will concede on that one. So let's start into blue then. Our first blue card we're going to talk about today is Anticognition. 2-mana instant for 1 and a blue, counter target creature or planeswalker spell. Unless its controller pays 2. If an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, instead counter that wait, hold on. If an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, instead counter that spell and then scry 2. It turns into a hard counter? Are you kidding me? Jer.
Yeah, I really like this card. Super cool design. I think it's really cool. Like early on, miscalculating their creatures and planeswalkers is gonna be good enough. And then later on it turns into a hard counter with some selection attached, and it's 2 mana. Can't ask for too much more. Like you'll get got sometimes by the fact that you can't get instants or sorceries or artifacts. I doubt you'll get got very often by the fact that it can't counter enchantments. But yeah, good card.
Very interesting. All right, next up we have the big crab, the Leviathan crab. Charix, the Raging Isle is here. 4 mana, 0/17. Sure. For 2 blue, spells your opponent's cast that target the crab cost 2 more to cast. And for 3, crab gets +X -X until end of turn, where X is the number of islands you control. I don't know what to say about this. Is this just a meme card, or is this actually kind of interesting?
It's a meme. You like crabs, right?
I mean, I do like crabs. I especially like beefy crabs, but I don't know if I need the meme crab in my deck.
Would you put this in Seinfeld, Jer?
Doesn't count as a win con.
Not even if you had a crab sub theme? Okay.
All right.
Oh, that's a good snort.
That's very good. All right.
Yeah.
Well, then let's just move on to Concerted Defense. Single mana instant for blue, counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1, plus an additional 1 for each creature in your party. Interesting. Now, this is an very interesting card to me here. I love this. I actually just love this card. It's so neat.
I too love card. I think quite good.
I'm not sold.
It's a pretty easy spell pierce.
I just
in a tempo deck.
But like, is it ever better than spell pierce? Not often. And the amount of times that like dazing their spell or force spiking their spell isn't good enough. I just want my counter spells to be more reliable.
Yeah, I'm casting this with Quirion Dryad, and like that's it.
You might have Wizard, but like in the counter spell decks, you're not getting Cleric or Warrior basically ever, and you might get Rogue occasionally. So like best case, it's a mana leak for 1, but like I think I'd just rather have Spell Pierce in my deck like every time.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like I might even play Flusterstorm over this one.
Interesting. All right, well, let's keep talking about it then, because I don't know, there are times when I'm a very low to the ground deck that I'm like, I'm going to play every 1 mana piece of interaction just to put my, that's the all in, I'm running Stifle, I'm running Force Spike, I'm running Daze.
I would play Disrupt over this.
I was going to say Disrupt. Dispel?
Wait.
Do you like this or Dispel?
I'd play this over Dispel, but well, I guess it depends.
I like this over Dispel and Disrupt as well. Like if we're talking tempo, like are we good podcast name, by the way. If we're just talking tempo, then I really like this card just because, again, it's just cheap counterspell redundancy that can be bad in scenarios, but that's also just the name of the game of tempo. And like Disrupt I think Disrupt is specifically instant or sorcery, right? Like I think much like our I'm not going to directly compare this to Anticognition, but like one of the things that we had talked about on that is that it hits planeswalkers. Like that's good. God, you have to hit an Oko. My lord, do you need to be able to get that to fairy or like snag a Ren in 6 early or whatever. And so if I am the kind of deck that will play Spell Pierce and Mental Misstep, Daze, and we'll also have, I'll also have Quirion Dryad, Tarmogoyf, Thing in the Ice, that kind of thing. Like blue-green is what comes to mind.
But those creatures don't buff this spell, right? then it's still just a worse Force Spike.
But I think that's fine, right? Like the strength of those decks is having redundancy in these cheap spells so that people like God, the people where they're like, okay, well, I got this Force Spiked, so clearly they won't have Spell Pierce or whatever. Like
how many Force Spikes could they possibly have? And you're like, you've activated my trap card. Very good.
Yeah, I'm going more off iconic cards that will fit into that deck with those creature types rather than, every single one that
the
can
party part. No, I get you there. I'm with Wheeler on that one, where if you're trying to get redundancy specifically in your early interaction, I like this card.
But that's it. Like this card, if you don't have pressure, is just not worth it.
Oh yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible.
You gotta have pressure to make these bad cards relevant.
I like that. Actually, as like a button on that. That's fantastic.
Tempo in a nutshell.
Let's move on to Confounding Conundrum. What a great name. 2-mana enchantment for 1 and a blue. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Love it already. When a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, if that player had another land enter the battlefield under their control this turn, they return a land they control to its owner's hand. That was like worded really weird, so my brain kind of shut off for a second. Jer, what do you think?
This card's kind of interesting. The fact that it cycles is nice. I'm not really sure where you'd play it or how applicable it is. Like, it's obviously good against fetch lands. Yeah, it's like kind of a prisony card, but it's like a weird prisony card, but it cycles. So,
admittedly, I put Jer on this one because I knew Serge and I would not be able to give a good, like a unbiased answer. Or like, maybe not unbiased. Well, no, unbiased, but in the sense of like, we would look at this and be like, oh yeah, you play this and they fetch and they have to return all their lands. Ooh, how do you like it now? Like from a prison, land equilibrium. Ooh, that kind of thing.
I'm gonna feel so good about this card as they slowly kill me with the one spell they resolve, but it's gonna be beautiful as I lose.
I'll lose the match, but I'll sleep at night.
Yeah, I'll win the moral. This is one of those cards where you win the moral victory when it resolves. I mean, you'll lose every game you play, but you'll go down just feeling so clever.
To its credit, though, it is better than like I don't know, psychic surgery. Like if I'm thinking of other like bad cards that people have probably convinced themselves to play in stacks.
This card sort of reminds me a bit of Shadow of Doubt. Like sometimes you'll get people and it'll feel really good, but it won't actually change that many games. But when you hit the right matchup, you'll just like make that player rip out all their hair. Like if you play against Scape Shift or like somebody like just tutors for Fast Bond and then you untap and play this, they'll literally just drop from the tournament.
They're like, why is this in your deck?
I mean, you could it's a good Enchantress card, I guess, if you branch out
it cantrips,
to band. Yeah. It's an enchantment that cantrips. It's low on blue pips. Yeah, that checks all the boxes.
You need to have a plan B. This is the sort of weird card that you're like, when it finds a home, it feels so right, but it's a weirdie. It's a weird one. It's a very weird one.
Really bad against Mystic Sanctuary.
It's really bad against a lot of cards here, but yeah. Oh god, Mystic Sanctuary over and over. All right, let's just move on. Deliberate. 2-mana instant for 1 and a blue. Scry 2, then draw a card. Jer.
This card's pretty great. I think overall it's probably better than the Thassa's thingy that came out recently, the enchantment. Yeah, that one. Because it's an instant or sorcery and more things trigger off instants and sorceries. I think I've sacked Omen of the Sea once in Highlander. Doesn't come up that often.
Yeah, so Omen of the Sea is, just for people to catch up really quick, same CMC, so 1 and a blue, also flash, so basically an instant. When it enters the battlefield, scry 2, then draw a card, and then has an activated ability, 2 and a blue, sack, and then scry 2. So very, very, very similar cards. And then I'll let you continue your evaluation there, Jer.
Yeah, it's obviously worse than Preordained, but if you're a deck that's going into 2-mana cantrips, like it's not as good as Impulse, but it's probably equivalent-ish with Anticipate. Probably better than Anticipate, actually.
Yeah, I think I like this a bit better than Anticipate, mostly because the draw is shockingly relevant. These cards are so weird, like cantrips, right? Because there's just like all these oh God, it sounds, all the conversation about this always sounds like actuallying, but it's really not. It's just like more just a game of like who can remember like stupid interactions with like Fairy Vandal or like Jolreel or whatever, where you're just like, oh yeah, draws a card, so I guess it triggers all these things. Is there anything else? And people are like, so you'd have like these two, you'd have like the pros and cons of this versus like Omen of the Sea on a whiteboard, and it would look like a joke, because you'd be like, the Omen of the Sea would be like, makes Tarmogoyf bigger or whatever, and yeah.
You're like, all right, very good. You're like, doesn't give them value if they've resolved a Sphinx. Cool. All right.
Like anticipate's better in combo.
Is it? You see that you get the same amount of depth, right? But if 2 of the top 3 cards are good, then you can get 2 of them.
I think I'd prefer the knowledge of selecting the best of all 3 rather than the idea of having 2 good cards. Because usually, I mean, for like a lot of combo decks that would play Anticipate, I mean, again, this can also change from combo deck to combo deck, but like, I think I would rather just up front show me what I have to pick from, pick the best of those, because that means I'm probably winning the game. Or I just like, yeah, the widest selection.
All right, let's move on to Glass Pool Mimic. 3 mana 0/0 Shapeshifter Rogue for 2 and a blue. You may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of target creature you control, except it's a rogue in addition to its other type. But wait, on the other side is a blue source that enters play tapped. Wheeler.
I like this card. I'm forever on a quest for a 3 mana clone. Like, you could just give us a clone that's like triple blue pips and it just copies anything. That's it. I don't care about anything else. Just give me a 3 mana clone for pod chains. Yeah, I guess pod chain is like the biggest one. Or like, and like, just come on, please. And Mirror Image is a card that technically exists, but also no. But this makes it a little bit easier to kind of like justify a slot. Typically, these decks are going to want to, hit their mana, untap, cast their spells. But sometimes if you're like pod chaining or survival chaining, you are going to want to, like, you'll spend a couple of turns playing just development, right? Playing things like In the Way, Ice Fang Codals, Wall of Blossoms, or whatever, that kind of stuff. So yeah, this isn't like a knockout of the park card, but it is something that I'm like, okay, well, you've added enough to this effect that I'm looking for that I'm at least going to give it a shot. And then also just like Merfolk, I guess, really likes this card.
All right, let's move on to our first Planeswalker, new Jace. Jace 19. Jace Mirror Mage, 3 mana for 1 blue, enters play with 4 loyalty, has Kicker 2. When Jace enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, create a token that's the same but not legendary and has a starting loyalty of 1. So for 5 mana, you can actually have 2 Planeswalkers. +1, scry 2. 0 ability, draw a card and reveal it, then remove a number of loyalty counters equal to the CMC of the revealed card. Jer, what do you think?
I really like this, Jace. I think it's interesting. It's not necessarily going to take over every game, but has the ability to. It's great on an empty board. It's pretty reasonable if they have a thing, because it has such high loyalty. It's gonna get you ahead. The abilities work really well together if you are able to make a copy. I think this card is quite good.
What do you think of it compared to like OG Jace Beleren?
I think this card's better.
Very cool. All right, then let's move on to Juwari. Did I pronounce that right? Juwari Disruption. 2 mana instant for 1 and a blue. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 1. But wait, on the other side, a blue source that enters play tapped. Jer.
This card is very good. I really like Censor as a card, and I think this card compares actually favorably in most of the decks that I want to play Censor in, because most of the time you're cycling Censors because you need a land. It's a little worse late game draw, I guess, which I guess is a pretty big downside now that I think of it. Maybe it's worse than Censor, but I'm still going to play it. Like, I'm still excited for this card.
I love it. Wheeler, got anything to add?
Well, my body reacted in a way to like the question of, is this worse than Censor? But then my brain was like, you don't know. So these cards, I guess I wanted to comment on like, these cards are so difficult to properly analyze without months of playing them.
You know what, Wheeler? All I can say is you worry too much. See what I did there? I tied it into the flavor text on the card. Boom.
This is an audio medium.
Oh no. Moving on. Ruin Crab. Single blue gets you a 0/3 crab with landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent mills 3 cards. I'm going to talk about this one. Let's take a little trip down memory lane and talk about the greatest Magic card ever printed, the Hedron Crab. So Hedron Crab is a 0/2 for single blue. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, target player puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard. So this is interesting. Upside, 1 more point of toughness. Downside, can only mill your opponent. Upside, doesn't target, so it gets around like hexproof on player. Now, that whole analysis kind of ignores the fact that mill doesn't really work in Highlander. And in normal constructed, A, your opponent only has 60 cards in their deck as opposed to 100 in Highlander. And B, there still isn't a density of mill cards yet to actually make mill fast enough to reliably compete against other decks.
And it's a 100-card format.
Yeah, did I not say that? I thought I led with that.
Probably did, but I feel like it needed to get reiterated.
Just state it again. So Hedron Crab is interesting. I have played the Crab before, and one of the ways Hedron Crab has worked in our format is self mill, the ability to fuel your own graveyard. Because in this format, this Eternal format, you get a lot of value out of your graveyard, and there's another strike against playing mill just as your main strategy is how much value you can potentially give your opponent. You imagine you mill them for 15, 20, even 50 cards, and they draw Yawgmoth's Will. They're like, haha, I have all the Moxen I need and the tutor to just storm kill you from all the resources you gave me.
Yeah, if people are wondering why there aren't a huge amount of rogues getting covered across all of this, it's because the mill ability that is attached to most of them is not a may. It is a mandatory milling of your opponent, which is usually real bad.
Yeah, that is just a tremendous liability, which takes any evaluation of the card and knocks it down several grades immediately.
Yeah, there's like a flying man in here that you could even cash in to draw a card if your opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. But it also just mills them every single time. And I looked at it, I got really excited. Then I read the other card. I looked at the 1-mana 1/1 flyer, loved it. Saw the mill, got really just like, oh, well, probably not playing this. And then saw the draw, and then I just got sad. Because, like, it's... Oh my god, like...
If it didn't have that line of text, all-star, MVP.
If they made it a May, if it was a May... Woo.
So, Ruin Crab, look, nobody's happier that you got printed than I am, but you're probably not seeing that much play in Highlander. Sorry, dear crab friend.
Serge, tell you what, bud. I'll throw together a mill deck for you, just like actual mill.
I'll bring that to the next memes and moxes, okay?
Oh, sick.
Next memes and moxes, I'm on mill.
It's recorded.
Just calling it now.
Can't back out.
Yeah. And then let's move on to our next card, Seagate Restoration. 7 mana sorcery for 4 blue. Draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand, +1. You have no maximum hand size for the rest of your game. And on the other side, enters as an untapped blue source if you want to pay 3 life. Jer.
This formatting of draw spell is so frustrating. Like, when you cast your big, huge draw spell, you don't want it to be based on the fact that you already have cards in your hand. Like, when you want to cast your huge draw spell, you want your hand to be basically empty. And this card is hot garbage if your hand is basically empty.
7 mana, draw 1.
It's so baffling.
I don't understand why they keep using this templating. Like, just give it draw 7. Like, it's fine. That's what you want it to be. Just let the blue mage draw cards. Like,
you're paying 7 mana, right?
It's not that hard.
Draw cards equal number of blue mana paid to cast this spell plus, or yeah, just keep it as that. Great, love it.
But yeah, this card's stone unplayable because the front half is stone unplayable. Like, if you're drawing any number of cards, you shouldn't be casting it. You're already winning. Like, I could go on. And if you actually need to draw cards, you shouldn't have cards in your hand because you shouldn't be spending.
I love 7 mana draw 1.
Yeah.
Love it.
Please stop.
All right, next up, Seagate Stormcaller. 2 mana, 2/1 human wizard. Where have I read that text before? For 1 and a blue, has kicker for 4 and a blue. When it enters the battlefield, copy the next instant or sorcery spell with CMC 2 or less you cast this turn when you cast it. If it was kicked, copy that spell twice. Interesting. You may choose new targets for those copies. Wheeler, what do you think?
Me and the lads just absolutely losing it, thinking about all the ops we're going to copy, all the serum visions. What's a bad card? Shock.
Serum visions.
Serum visions.
This is really expensive.
This is
what?
Okay,
No,
so maybe I shouldn't have started with the bad. What I was working up to was those are all not great spells, but even if I get to copy them, that's really cool and good. This card is absurd.
You like it?
Yeah, I think this card is an absolute like powerhouse slam dunk because copying duresses, inquisitions, thoughtseize, lightning bolt, brainstorm,
recall, time walk,
demonic tutor. Again, I was going to kind of price of progress. You know,
why'd you start with the bad cards? Now I look like an idiot.
I just want to like copy Unearth. That's all I want to do.
Yeah. Oh yeah. This with reanimate. Ooh.
Yeah.
So I start with the bad cards because again, that's a thing that's also good. Like this is a card that gets so much better depending on what cheap spells you have in your format. And we don't have multiples of all of our lightning bolts and swords and whatnot. So we might not always have them.
Now we do.
But even if we have the ones that we play for redundancy's sake, you know, like Chain Lightning, Opt, I don't know, I guess 2 mana spells. So, hey, Collective Brutality. Oh, mama.
That's a good one.
Like, that is still very good.
Collective Brutality's nuts.
Yeah. And so, like, that's with the, like...
You get all the boats twice.
Yeah. That's with the, like, air quotes, less impressive cards. But the same thing for, like, you only have one of those. So you will have instances where you play this card and it will copy Lightning Bolt. It'll copy Ancestral. It'll copy Time Walk. And the way that this is worded too, right, is that, like, you get this resolves first, right? If this resolves, you're going to get at least one of whatever you cast next. Doesn't matter if they have the Spell Pierce or whatever, right? And it only costs 2. And it's blue, and it's a wizard, which is shockingly relevant.
This is probably the most interesting bait spell I've ever seen for a counter spell.
Yeah, this card is
right, because like if they counter it, you get to cast the other spell you want, and if they don't counter it, you automatically get to resolve the spell that follows it.
This is also just very wheelery, but I'm looking at this, and the first thing I'm thinking of is like Revelark and Riptide Laboratory. Just like the fact that it has 2 power and 1 toughness.
Yeah.
Do you know what's a sick card to copy with this? Crop Rotation.
Oh.
Wow.
I
only just thought of that.
Oh, wow. Okay, Slam Dunk, probably my favorite card in the set now.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
And you will
shall
get
we
to
move
7.
on? Oh.
Yes, let's move on, but I do want to... closer, you will get to 7 sometimes.
8/9.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, because you need to be able to cast the other spell. Yeah. All right, next up, we have Celundi Vision, 3 mana instant for 2 and a blue. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal an instant or sorcery and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order, or blue source that enters tapped. Jer.
I don't know how many decks want this front side. Like, I want to put this card into High Tide, but it's not a land. I think you probably still put it into High Tide, even though it's not an island on the other side. It's not exciting, but
yeah, I Curb was the first thing that popped in my head.
Oh yeah, it's good in Curb. You're right.
How do you feel about this in like just control?
No, I don't think so.
No,
I like this in Scapeshift. I like this as maybe something you hit with an Explore or what's the green blue one at instant speed?
Growth Spiral.
Growth Spiral as a way to, if you're hitting those extra land drops, to make sure you hit them, and if not, to fill your hand for other things.
I could see maybe playing it in the 4-color version, but not in the rug version.
All right.
Yeah.
If you have a high density of tutors.
If demonic tutors in your point spread.
Yeah, exactly.
And let's move on to our final blue card today, Thieving Skydiver. 2 mana, 2/1 Merfolk Rogue for 1 and a blue. Has kicker, but X can't be 0, which is very interesting. So you may pay an additional X as you cast a spell. So it looks like you have to pay at least 3 for this. Has flying, and when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, which is a weird if, as X can't be 0, gain control of target artifact with CMC X or less. If it's an equipment, attach it to the Skydiver. What is the X can't be 0? That's really weird to me. Wheeler.
Yeah, I had a like an actual just massive grin was on my face as Serge started reading this card's name because I love this card so much. I stand by it. Flying Men. The only thing that beats that unbeatable deck is Hornet Queen and Jite. And while this can't stop Hornet Queen, it can sure steal a Jite, but it doesn't have to.
What about Pyroclasm?
Oh, we don't talk about that.
Forked Bolt.
Oh yeah, Forked Bolt also does it. But yeah, this card's really good. I think there are pre-existing archetypes that would just take this as a 2-power 2/1 flyer. The fact that it has an ability that, typically if you play this card, you're probably playing creatures in your deck, which means you're not super excited about their Umezawa's Jite. You're not super excited about their Sword of X and Y. This card is also a Merfolk, so Merfolk gets a little bit of an added bonus, which I feel like I guess we've been kind of quiet on it, but like that's a thing. Merfolk will always take more playables. This card's great.
All right, I have an important rules clarification here on why it says X can't be 0. So you can't cast the Skydiver, say X is 0, and steal a Moxen for the triggered ability to happen. So if you want to steal something that's 0 for kicker, it has to be a minimum of 1. So you can play it just as a 2/1 with flying, but if you want that extra line of text, you have to pay 1, even if you want to steal something that costs 0.
I guess this would be kind of make Vintage a little disgusting. I mean, maybe this card will already have a splash in that format, but if it was just 2 mana, 2/1, like lol, nice mocks.
Yeah, lol, nice mocks, right? So I appreciate that. It was a little bit confusing for a second. I was like, wait, do I have to pay?
Oh God.
Yeah.
This can also just steal like large stone quail serpents.
Yeah.
This could take Hagerback Walkers.
Oh yeah. No, this card.
Smokes.
The more I think about this card, the cooler it is, because there's a lot of very powerful artifacts in our format. Speaking of very powerful artifacts, let's move on to Forsaken Monument, the first artifact we're talking about today. 5 mana legendary artifact. Colorless creatures get +2/+2. Whenever you tap a permanent for colorless, add an additional colorless, and whenever you cast a colorless spell, gain 2 life. Wheeler.
This card's busted, and here's why. I'm going to try and keep it very succinct because I've already spent like an hour talking about this card today. Obviously, doubling up on mana, there are things that can go infinite with that. The monoliths come to mind. This isn't going to go infinite with Grim Monolith by itself, but we'll figure that out down the line. But aside from that, if you're willing to pay a 5 mana artifact that just sits in play, chances are you're going to have a lot of ways to add colorless mana, and doubling that mana is pretty cool and good. Gaining life when you cast colorless spells is not entirely irrelevant when we're talking about these combo decks too, because sometimes you just, like, if you've played Eggs or Paradox and you have Aetherflux Reservoir in play, like, we've all had those, like, you'll have those turns where, like, well, I didn't technically do anything, but I did gain 18 life. So I guess I'm not dying. But the actual biggest thing of this card is colorless creatures you control get +2/+2 for the combo decks, because this makes your Sai and like your Saheeli Sublime Artificer, your Mirrodin Besieged, which I owe an apology to that card. It makes those cards disgusting. They just, like, you just make all these things that were on blocking duty, and now you get to overrun and kill your
Now they're on killing duty.
Yeah.
I just need to add one minor clarification. It doesn't double mana. It only ever adds +1. Just before the comments get in there.
Yeah, and worthwhile too, before anybody gets a big boo-boo with this, is that it's whenever you tap a permanent. So don't go thinking your KCI, Karkline Ironworks, adds 3 mana. Yeah, and there's other niche scenarios, but just keep that in mind when you play this card.
All right, next up, Myriad Construct. 4 mana 4/4 Construct with kicker 3. If it was kicked, it enters the battlefield. Sorry, I can't read this without laughing. With a +1/+1 counter on it for each non-basic land your opponent controls. Okay? And then when it becomes the target of a spell, sack it and get a number of 1/1 colorless construct tokens equal to its power. This thing is absurd. This thing is everything my workshop decks have ever wanted. You want a robot that just comes down hard and finishes a game fast and lives through not necessarily through a wrath, but like makes removal really awkward. Love it. And with the templating, you can actually equip it with a sword or GT. Like that targeting ability doesn't kill it. Only your opponent's removal spells or your own removal spells if you want to go wide. I love this card.
And that also gives you more little homies after, too.
Cast this kicked and immediately put those boots on it.
Yeah, choo-choo. All right, next up we have the Skyclave Relic, 3-mana artifact with Kicker 3, indestructible. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, create 2 tapped tokens of it, and then taps to add 1 mana of any color. Wheeler.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Zendikar Rising episode of 3-mana rock flex slot. I'm your host, Ben Wheeler, and today we will be cycling out the cards that we've received from the past couple of sets and putting in Skyclave Relic. I feel like this shuffle happens a lot, but I mean, that's also just kind of the definition of a flex slot. It's indestructible, which is, oh god, it's so relevant. When you play 3-mana, getting your 2-mana rock blown up sucks. Getting your 3-mana rock blown up, it feels so bad. So bad. And then late game, being able to create a couple of tokens of it when you're trying to do things with, again, Paradox Engine or Kark Clan Ironworks, or just making your academy that extra special. Pretty cool and good. I like this card. I don't know if I'm always playing it over Bonder's Ornament. 3-mana artifact from Ikoria, the commander set, taps for any color, pay 4, tap. Each player that controls a Bonder's Ornament, draws a card. I don't know if this is necessarily beating out that all the time, but it's got a lot going on for it, so I'm pretty excited to slide this in.
All right, let's talk about our final artifact today, Spare Supplies. 2-mana artifact, when it enters the battlefield, draw a card, but it enters tapped, and then 2 and tap and sack, draw a card. Wheeler, do you like this egg?
It's a really good egg. It's not best egg, but good egg. I'd say this is like a B+ egg. Coming into play tapped is whatever. Obviously, you can't crack it immediately, but it draws on ETB, which, most of the 2-drops do. And if you wait a bit, or if you want to get extra spicy and Voltaic Key to untap it, that sounds more pathetic than it ends up being. I mean, it's an egg. I'll always play every single one of these, and this one just has the opportunity to draw 2 cards. Yeah, good egg.
All right, let's move on to lands. Now, this set brought us a new dual land. Well, kind of. So let's talk about Branch Loft Pathway. This is one of the rare double face cards, and we're just going to talk about this as an example for the cycle. On the other side, we have Boulder Loft Pathway. Now, on the Branch Loft side, add a green, enters untapped. The other side is add a white, enters untapped. What do you think of these dual lands? Let's start with Jer.
I think they're pretty cool. They come in untapped, which is nice. I think they're going to see a bunch of play, especially in 2-color decks. Less so in 3+ color decks.
It's a little tricky because you can't fetch for them, but I guess at this point, this is just a density thing, eh?
Yeah, I think so. And especially in the 2-color decks, you often just need to make sure that your mana is good in your opening hand, and you don't need to worry about it too much beyond that. Whereas in 3-color decks, the fact that they're not dual lands and not fetchable probably makes them a little worse. You'll probably see them in some 3-color decks, but not all. They're solid lands.
Wheeler, what do you think the downside is to adding another land to the deck that doesn't have any relevant type? Is that even something worth considering when you look at a land like this?
I mean, if you're like a 2-color deck, then you already, especially a 2-color enemy deck, you already know the pain of like having an off-color fetch that just can't do what you want it to do. So that is just some kind of suffering you're already, exposed to. But I think that's fine. Like, yeah, that's not like, if you could fetch for these, that'd be phenomenal. Absolutely. That's just strict upside. But I really like these for 2-color decks. I'm with Jer. I think I like some of them a lot more than others, right? Like the black-blue one is like the enemy colored ones. I don't know. I'm a little off on some of them. Like I think the Boros and Orzhov ones are the like most welcome, just because the mana for those decks is just trash. The blue-red one's a little interesting, just because you have blue. So whatever. The black blue one I'm actually the most excited about.
Yeah, the black blue one's huge. Combo decks everywhere, just like untapped land. You what?
Yeah. this is like it's basically just like River of Tears, except
you don't need to think about playing lands anymore.
Yeah.
The amount of times I've lost a game because I played a land with a River of Tears
and goozled yourself on. Yeah. Wow.
And just even like blue black decks that are like staring awkwardly at like Hymn to Torak and Counterspell, right? And you're like,
But that's when you want an actual proper dual land, right? Like, I don't know how much this cycle helps there. It helps in the first 2 or 3 turns, but if you actually have a hand with both of those, I don't know if I'm happier with this land in hand.
But I think the first 2 or 3 turns are also the most important turns, right?
Agreed.
Like if you can casting the correct spells like early on is so instrumental to winning games of Magic, especially in Canlander, right? Like games can be decided by turn 3 and then they'll end on turn 9.
Yeah. It's the little mistake you made there, especially in a control deck and just seeing that compound turn after turn.
Yeah. And so like if I can get out my double pip spell early to then like play my other things later in the game.
No, that's fair. That's fair. All right, let's move on to the final card of our set review today, and that is going to be Crawling Barrens. It's a land that taps to add a colorless, or for 4 mana, you can put 2+1/+1 counters on it, then have it become a 0/0 elemental creature until end of turn. That is still a land. JR, take us home.
This card's really good, and I'm going to kill and be killed a lot by this card.
Yeah, this is actually probably another one of my favorite cards from the entire set.
Yeah.
I think if this is interesting as another kill condition for infinite mana in like the green-white combo deck. If you don't have access to your Walking Ballista for whatever reason, this is just such a beautiful mana sink just to kill people.
Not bad.
I mean, obviously, if you already have infinite mana, you're pretty happy. But like I like this card a lot. All right. Well, that is going to do it for our thoughts on part 1 of our Zendikar set review, Zendikar Rising, set review. We covered white, blue, artifact, and land. We will be back. This is likely even going to be a 3-part set review. Make sure you tune in for part 2, which is going to be black and something? Maybe black and red or black and green. Either way, it's going to be awesome. So stick around to that. Like to thank all of you for listening. Thank you very much to my co-hosts, Ben and Jer. Reminder that this podcast is brought to you by you with your support over at the Patreon at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.